But my general experience has been in all the webinars that I've done, since 25th of March, I must have done 25 or something. In most cases, people are bang on dot on time, even before you log in.
Absolutely. So on. Yeah. Good evening, everybody. Let me welcome you on behalf of the Bombay Management Association. Professor Mani welcoming you to the HR Convention 2020. In its fifth session, this time in the digital format due to the circumstances around us. As many of you have been with us over the last 4 weeks, enjoyed very interactive sessions with several of our panelists. Here we are back again with two technology gurus, if I may say so, from leading organizations representing L&T NxT, L&T Infotech. And they're going to here discuss with our facilitator, our program director, Yogi Sriram, about technology, its implications on HR. How does the HR role change? What is going to be the implication of AI, ML, and so many of these new technology concepts that we come across? Perhaps we use without knowing much about them. Here is a wonderful opportunity to listen to two stalwarts. And I'd like to first, as usual, welcome Yogi to this fifth session.
Thank you.
With this word of introduction to our new participants, that you will realize that Yogi Sriram is rightly called the Bhishma Pitamaha of the HR profession. A person who has not only contributed to the profession, but has helped so many become HR leaders over a period of time. Regularly awarded for his stellar contributions to the fraternity, still continues to be part of the most favorite people who are invited back to his alma mater, Tata Institute of Social Sciences, where he was there today morning to inaugurate a new batch of HR students who were joining the institution. Such is the charisma and leadership of Yogi Sriram in the human resource profession. And we are privileged from BMA to have him as our program director for the HR convention. Over to you, Yogi, to set the ball rolling and take us through this journey of learning today.
Thanks, Professor Mani. I thought I'll start with a little disclaimer because this entire session, which is session number 4, right?
5.
5, and we have 4 more to go, right?
Correct.
This session shouldn't be mistaken to be a whole L&T affair because I am an advisor. Aan is working in LNT NxT, which is a division of L&T. And Sujay is working in a listed company in the L&T group. So while L&T is all over in the intros, we're all working in independent spheres. And we have, I guess, independent thoughts, as you'll see. This is a super topic, actually. What can AI and machine learning do for HR in specific, which means for predicting behavior, for recruiting, for talent acquisition, for strategic talent acquisition, for predicting engagement scores, and behavior is something that's so elusive. So how can AI and machine learning be used for that? And one of my favorite themes to be reading, and Sujay has helped me with some readings on that, is about how one should ensure that biases are not baked into the standard algorithms. Gives me great pleasure to introduce two colleagues. Aan Chauhan is the Chief Technology Officer at L&T NxT. L&T NxT is one of the new ventures of the L&T group to get into a space which spearheads technology excellence for L&T. Our strategy is to get in more and more into the services sector. So we already have LTTS, which is L&T Technologies, LTI, which is L&T Infotech earlier, and Mindtree, and we have other ventures which are coming up in the tech space. But L&T NxT is a very significant part of the new plan, and it's responsible for creating a unified technology vision for the organization, harnessing emerging technology trends in incubating and disseminating complex technology capabilities across L&T. Aan is a very seasoned executive and is technology leader with over 25 years spanning across BFSI, insurance, manufacturing. BFSI includes insurance, manufacturing, healthcare, retail, technology sectors, and is an innovative thinker and very well known in this field. Prior to L&T, he was associated with Cognizant Technology Solutions for nearly 15 years. And he's also spent 8 years in IBM Global Services from 96 to 2004. He's from IIT Kanpur, a BTech in electrical engineering, and he's a member of a number of societies. Aan is an avid dog lover and loves to swim. He teaches school and college kids in his spare time. So we would like to hear from Aan and also Sujay about how AI is being used in edutech. And there's so much of buzz, about the NEP, and we'd love to hear them speak about edutech because that's a very, very promising area in this country. And he enjoys long drives and walks. Sujay. Sujay is the Vice President and Head Strategy and Innovation LTI, which is a L&T Information Technology earlier. Now it's just called LTI. Sujay Sen has been with LTI for more than 20 years and is currently the VP for this area, which I just said. He works with LTI clients globally to help them set and achieve their innovation agenda. He's from IIM Bangalore and has been a speaker at several renowned forums like the New York Stock Exchange Outperform event, MIT's CISR's annual research forum, amongst others. So I'm sure you gentlemen will have a great chat, fireside chat, which will stimulate us, but maybe I could fire some opening questions, if that's okay. So, you can start in any order that you like. I think it'll be interesting to hear from both of you, one by one, about, there's so much of talk about AI. I think AI, if I'm not wrong, was invented a year after I was born, and I'm not going to embarrass myself to tell you when I was born, but it's a pretty long time back. It's not something that's absolutely new. So what happened all these years to AI is question one. How come suddenly there's such a big buzz about it when AI was, discovered way back in the 50s? And how is it being, spoken about in the context of employee performance, productivity, and areas like engagement? Aan, maybe you'll kick off and then Sujay.
Sure, Mr. Yogi, thank you for that. You can hear me loud and clear?
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. So very quickly, Yogi, to answer your question, yes, AI has been around for a long, long time. In fact, many of us don't realize that OCR engines have always used AI, and we know OCR engines have been around. The ones which scan your images and give you character sets back. Those are the first sets of commercial AI applications, and before that.
Aan, can you hold the mic up a bit? It's crackling a little bit, so I don't know.
Any better? I'm using laptop mic right now, Yogi. So
it's much better.
Better if I bring my laptop closer.
Mm-hmm.
As you rightly observed, AI has been around for a long, long time.
Our participants are saying that there is some noise in between and the speech is not being heard. So we'll have to, if you don't mind, let's experiment a little bit. And can you adjust are you speaking with headphones on or?
No, right now I'm using just my laptop mic. Let me go and find an headphone. Just give me 1 sec.
No problem, we'll wait. Maniji,
Sujay, to
one of the most, no, we'll wait. One of the most difficult things to do in times like this is to give yourself a haircut. For those of us who need a haircut. I mean, of course, I'm not that challenged. I'm follically challenged. But any amount of I don't know whether it can help in giving yourself a haircut. I mean, how can you coordinate, It's looking in a mirror.
Oh, yes. I think Sujay has a view on that specifically. He seems to be
The
smiling.
idea is to get him to.
Yeah, I'm sure Yogi's thoughts are coming up looking at me. So, AI can give you all sorts of ideas about other haircuts, financial haircuts. But yeah, this one's.
Yeah. Okay, Aan.
Can you hear me better?
Yeah, very good now.
Okay, wonderful. So what I was saying, Yogi, was given the fact that AI has been around for a long time, the reason you see it becoming more prominent and more omnipresent is one, obviously, the compute powers that we have on individual handheld devices even. So our ability to run some of these algorithms, which have always been very compute intensive, on devices as small as your phones or your watches, any kind of wearable, we can now run these things. So to me, that is one big factor because of which the commercial application has increased. And second, I think, is just the advancement in the deep learning space, the amount of work that the organizations have done with the data catching up, right? See, early days, the amount of data available for you to go and work upon was also being very limited. You wanted satellite images, there were very few organizations who had access to those. Now the data that is available, which is truly the engine for oil for the AI engine, becoming so easily available, and the richness of the data that is available is also fueling this whole advancement of AI and adoption of AI as well. To me, those two are the primary things I see which are different if I looked at a decade back even compared to in the last 10 years as to what is causing these. The size of data, the players who are playing with this data, they are also making a lot of things open and public. A lot of tooling has appeared. So you do not need to have that rich mathematical background or a statistical background. You can use the tools, you can play with inputs, outputs, see your results are coming without worrying too much about the nitty-gritty details. So that ease of use also, I think, is playing a big factor in terms of adoption by multiple industries.
Sujay, I want to quote, I'd love to hear your comments, but please start with commenting on this quote. Gary Kasparov, and who doesn't know him, the famous chess player, after losing to a machine in chess said, AI will change every aspect of our daily lives. It won't change our nature, it will reveal it. It won't change our nature, it will reveal it. Comments on that, and please go ahead.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think can't agree with him enough. And actually, this lockdown is kind of proven that, as the amount of work came on us, the household work, at least, me and some of my friends, we speak to, and we figured out how much of automation we've started doing. There's a floor cleaner machine that kind of, is mapping the house and trying to do a lot of things. That's integrated with Alexa. It now knows where the walls are, etc. And the nature that it is exposing is laziness. Inherently, otherwise it's a great exercise. But yeah, coming to AI, I think I'll just want to add to whatever Aan said. I think he's got that spot on. I think there are a couple of other things that also happened simultaneously. One is, of course, AI definitely needs a lot of data, right? Without the past data, it will have no impact. It needs to learn. So, and over a period of time, in a lot of our areas, there was data that got collected, meaningful data. And then secondly, I also believe there's a software aspect to it. The FANG companies, right? The Facebook, Apple, Netflix, Google, plus maybe Microsoft. They kind of started, developing this and making this fashionable, right? Whatever happens there is kind of getting reflected within the enterprise. So people got a sense of it. It got a positive loop. And then, whatever they were doing, we could replicate in the enterprise for some of our clients. And that's kind of had a, domino effect. And of course, whatever Aan said, the technology being available, the data being available is all being helpful. So it's been there, but it's kind of, got an exponential kick because of these, companies. And they use AI, as you would know, in so many of their tools. I don't know, there was a recent movie that came on Netflix, very recent, Social Dilemma. You know, I don't know if anyone has seen this, but that, you know, their whole, their Facebook, Google people talking about it, their number one agenda was to create addiction using AI. You know, knowing what you're going to do. If you stop using the software, just give you a gentle hint. Oh, your friend has gone to Singapore. Do you want to look at it? You know, kind of get the mood of the people from the post, and you know, then. So I think that's the kind of AI that we got. That's reflecting on us, right? So it's a wonderful movie. I just happened to see it last night. I just thought I'll let you know, it's fresh on my mind. But that's what I would add to what Aan just said.
Yeah. And, you know, with this recent horrific pandemic that we've seen, there is a huge amount of technological ingenuity which has happened. I mean, of course, the explosion of MS Teams and all that we're all seeing, but there's a whole lot of ingenuity that we are seeing, including that little round shaped thing that goes around your dining table and collects dust and mops up and all that. $35,000 or whatever. But there is possibly a gap which is growing between technological ingenuity and social ingenuity. Social ingenuity is all about using your creative skills to understand, to judge. You know, the first session that we had in this series, raising a toast, business raising a toast to HR, was with Mukundarajan, and that session was all about the elements of good judgment. How can AI be used leveraging the intuition part, the social ingenuity part, the experience part to make judgments? Or are we going to, at some point of time, just depend on a machine to decide whom we're going to select, whom we're going to promote, whom we're going to, you know, job rotate, etc.? Any of you?
Yeah. So
Go ahead, Sujay.
Yeah, no, Aan, go ahead, no problem.
So very quickly, Yogi, I think there are two parts that we have to look at it. One, I think with any new tool as it happens, as it gets widespread acceptance just because it's a fad or whatever else, people also expect too much from it. And I think right now the general expectation of anybody and everybody is, give me an AI tool which will just do it for me, right? No matter what I'm looking at. Specifically from an HR perspective, if you ask me, or to that matter, from any industry perspective, any line of business perspective, the whole idea of AI and humans is not based on the fact that AI will take over what humans do. We have to understand that AI dwells in two parts of sciences: the data sciences, which it is good at, which is all to do with models, statistics, physics underneath it, mathematical modeling and everything else.
Yeah.
But any of our lines of businesses, when we work, there's also this behavioral science that kicks in, right? The economics, right from economics of it to the psychology to the philosophy and ethics and everything else. AI tool sets, if you look at it, are very good at solving this large scale problem that, given huge amount of data sets that we have gathered now, how can we draw much better inferences which are backed by that data? If you turn it around a little bit, what we are trying to say is we leverage AI to make decisions which otherwise are a little difficult for humans to analyze and at such a speed in such a time, and back it truly objectively by data. Now, biases can kick in the way you use AI. We'll come to that later. But assuming that your AI tool set is now geared and trained for what you wanted it to do, it will churn out that analysis and the results, which are more statistical driven, mathematical model driven, complex modeling driven, whichever way you want to look at see it. But to look at it and say that I could bring in my economics of it, or the ethics or the morals of it, which are the human part of the creative thinking and advanced or higher level thinking, we are still some time and gap away from it, in the sense that there are narrow AI solutions which claim to be able to analyze human behavior, but if you look at it, it's not generic, it's very specific ones. And to me, when I look at the evolution, to me, the path of the evolution of AI and humans together is more going to be, as we call, collaborative intelligence rather than human or artificial intelligence. Right? So both will be complementary to each other. It cannot be that either machines or humans. And you will see the flavor of this coming in various ways. Another view of it that you will see it manifest itself is by people thinking that AI will take away a lot of jobs. Right?
Yeah.
You look back at history and you see anything which has disrupted so far our human lives, right from the time when writing was invented, which disrupted the entire vocal mode of learning, right? To the printing, to the digital media, to the internet, and now AI. Every time that disruption has happened, it has always created more jobs. But yes, in a very different area. Your conventional areas start going down. There are new areas and opportunities that open up. And even if you look at very recent examples of last 10 years, Airbnb, Uber, right? Or even the Googles of the world. Google is supposed to use technology and do everything through the machines. But you'll be surprised to know that Google employs maximum number of people to actually go and collect that data in a meaningful manner. For them to give you a 3D view of a particular street, they still cannot figure out how to have a machine do that automatically for them. You require humans for that higher level of rational thinking, visualizing, and putting it all together in their head that this is how I have to take, these are the angles I have to take, and then the machine will be able to augment it. So to me, when I look at AI and humans together, it's a two-part process. Humans have to train the machines for the machines to understand how the analysis has to be done. And then once the machines are trained, they help the humans to do the whole analysis at a much higher speed, scale, accuracy, and they're able to look at angles which otherwise the human mind would have missed, which is what we say that machine is inferring and finding things which we never were able to find. It's not that the human mind could not have found, it's just that the size of the data is so huge that the amount of time you would have taken would be much higher. Right? So to me, it is always a question of collaborative intelligence coming together. It has never been us versus them, as unfortunately the Terminators of the series would like to point it out, or the Matrix one if you look at the more recent ones.
Yeah.
But it's much more a balance that has to be created. It will have the impact in terms of standard, regular, run-of-the-mill things, repeated things going away. That's the first level of attack. The second level would be a lot of place we were able to map as thinking areas. Even those will be taken away, where the AI systems will be able to do much better expertise and rule-based things to do the thinking more objectively, more consistently. The areas where any system would need help still from the human perspective is the behavioral aspects, the creative aspects of the things that you are looking at.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and to add to what Aan's saying, across our 250 clients, wherever we are doing these AI projects and, also AI / automation / some amount of digital, specifically in HR, one of the things that we also measure is human in the loop. And, very interestingly, what happens is when we pick up, when we pick a process, it kind of demonstrates the curve kind of demonstrates few ways. Sometimes the human in the loop is 100% and then keeps going down. And then at some point it just plateaus and they can't go down further. That's where the decision-making accuracy goes down. Some of it actually goes down all the way to zero. And you see computers making better decisions. It depends on what process you're picking. Actually, we are recently executing a very large-scale HR program for one of those new age digital companies, one of the FANG companies. And the challenge with them is, although they have these beautiful looking processes and portals and everything on the outer side, from the inside, it is a complete mess. I think, of course, that allows a lot of flexibility because these companies kind of thrive on flexibility. But right now, if I look at this specific company, it's going out of hand. And if they don't solve the problem now, it's going to be a problem that will take a lot to fix. So we've taken 720 sub processes, and we are going to be fixing them. The business case is a cost case, reduction of cost. However, this is an AI/automation project. So there we are looking at that human in the loop, and it looks like almost 80% of the process lends itself to fully AI enabled automation at some point. But some of those critical processes where it will stop at 70-80%. There are a lot of these mundane mundane tasks that aren't referred to. Those are completely up for automation, right? And when you do automation, I think 3 years back, when we really didn't bring in the power of AI, and when we were automating, I think we were running some very horrible projects because we kind of did it very black and white, and AI allowed us to bring that gray into the decision making, right? Otherwise, you had to code all of the decisions into the system when it was automation. Now we have AI, so we don't have to code those decisions, right? It can learn and start bringing those decisions in. So it has helped. I think bringing in AI to automation has helped to bring that flexibility, but you always have to have that human in the loop. Now, how much percentage of automation, AI and human in the loop you have for a process, it'll depend process to process.
Two questions which I wanted to ask both of you, and I'm asking both together just because I'm insecure that I'll forget one. And if I do, Mani will help me. Question one is about the time span for AI to catch up. I mean, since Aan is an electrical engineer, I think electricity from the time Thomas Alva Edison invented it took almost 17, 18 years to become really commercialized in that sense. I mean, there were still gas lights in America that were lit up. And I don't know when the first turbine happened and the first boiler happened, but it took a long time. Question one is on this, that what is the tipping point when you think AI is being, I mean, when a particular technology is being exploited enough? Like I just talked about electricity taking a long time. And Pokemon Go took something like 20 days or 10 days or something to get absolutely exploited in terms of a technology. So that is the other extreme. So how long would it take, in your view, to exploit it fully? The second question is unrelated, and forgive me for asking both together because I'm excited to hear the answer. If I sit in front of a machine which has got AI in it and tell them that I feel euphoric at times, I feel sad at times, I feel hungry, I cry without explanation, and so on, is it going to tell me you have bipolar depression and I think you should be having these tablets 3 times a day and also go in for counseling? Or, so in other words, are psychiatrists going to disappear? Are health care workers in mental health areas going to disappear? How is it going to work?
Sure. Sujay, you want to go on this one, or should I get rolling?
Yeah, we'll do alphabetical. Aan, A for Aan, S for Sujay.
Yeah, no, that's why I wanted to make sure that every one or two I let you if you wish.
No, no worries.
So very quickly, Yogi, I'll come to both of them one at a time.
Sure.
One, whether AI will be able to do what you're asking for, that looking at you, looking at your facial expressions, looking at what information you are providing, can it run through the knowledge base that it has been trained for and come back and tell you it will probably come back and say you have probability of this rather than saying you have it. Because AI is finally, at the end of the day, it's all underlying mathematical models are all probability and statistics driven. Especially when you're dealing with human sensitive areas, I think it's almost a well-established fact that machines should assist and provide inputs and let the decision be made by individuals who are supposed to be the SMEs on it. Having said that, if you hear the medical fraternity itself, some of the very well-known and renowned doctors and physicians, given the numbers of them are very low, everybody is actually expecting AI to solve this problem, whereby for your regular checkups, regular symptoms, looking at your pulse, your heart rate, your BP, machines who are already reading this for you, the data could be fed to a machine who could go through it much more clinically and objectively compared to a physician and come back and do the combinations and come back and say, most likely these are 3 things that you want to go and get tested for. That these are 3 things you may want to go and get tested for, see the results, and then go and see a physician, kind of a thing, which itself is a huge task right now. But will it be able to go and look at your data, pick color of the skin or the way you are talking, pick up certain areas, and intuitively, based on the past experience of a human like a doctor does, and figure out that probably this is wrong, or this is what I think your problem could be? It's still some time away. It may happen as the data is built, as the knowledge is built for the machines, because this whole model works on the fact that the more well you train the machine, the more well you explain to the machine as humans train these guys, the more effective the machine is going to be when it comes back and amplifies the result for you, right? So that is what I keep talking about.
And the debatable point here is that, I'm sitting and I'm sitting in front of the machine, I'm not lying, I'm telling the machine exactly my symptoms, but the machine has no empathy. It has no eyes to roll. It has no ability to look at me with, I don't know how empathy is to be described by a machine. I'm struggling. So that part is completely missing. So I wonder whether, especially for mental health or even for, employee assistance programs where employees need counseling and stuff, whether this will ever be a perfect solution or even a near perfect solution. That was my point.
And the way I look at it, Yogi, is that it will always be the assistance mode in these areas where there's empathy, where there is a question of morals and ethics, right? Yeah. That is something that people have still not figured out as to how to get a machine to do, by nature of the fact that by the nature that it is a machine, we know that it's going to be very binary. Probably once quantum technologies kick in, which are going to change the world, in that perspective of not being as binary, being able to solve a lot more complex, lot more naturally complex problems in the way they do it, maybe that part of the world will change. So for me, if you ask me, it's not just the AI which is causing the disruption for us right now. Along with that, you have to look at the fact that the other big barrier that we are also crossing, where AI is helping quite a bit, but it's a field in its own, is the ability of a machine to interpret the human communication, right? Starting with language to being able to look at even your brainwave patterns and the communication with the brain directly without using a language as well. And you are seeing very narrow applications of those already, right? Very recently, I was seeing an artificial limb which the person was controlling through his setup of his jaw movement in the brain, and was able to move the limbs. So he was a paraplegic who was able to use that limb and see and move it, kind of a stuff. And we have seen examples of those already emerging. For me, that set of technologies, which is basically flipping the whole world around, rather than humans understanding how the computer works and the computer language and feeding it into that, right? You look at it right now, whatever we do, it's basically to make the computer understand, right? Even as a user, I have a mobile interface that I have to understand because my mobile only understands it that way, right? I cannot go and speak to my mobile right now and say, open my ICICI account, go and do 10 rupee transaction, send it to Sujay. But the way the language is getting interpreted, the moment we are able to make that flip, that the machine understands the human language and human doesn't have to do the translation, that's going to be a huge disruption, which AI is playing a role, but this in itself is such a huge field that, think about it, you'll suddenly go from a huge focus on user experience, customer experience from a UI perspective to a zero UI. Because now I don't need a user interface. User interface is nothing but a mechanism for me as a human to tell machine what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
At the moment it becomes natural communication, it's going to just flip it everywhere around, right? It's almost like if I have to fill a form, looking at the form, if I could read out what I want to fill and machine would just fill it for me, I would prefer that interface anytime to keying it in. Right? My keying in speed is going to be much slower than the way I speak, the rate at which I speak. And it's going to be much slower than my brain thoughts if I can pick it from the brain and do it. If a system interface appears where as I'm thinking and I'm able to tell the machine what to do and it's able to fill that for me, that's going to change the whole world quite a bit, right? So to me, once those kind of things happen, then once that kind of a technology kicks in, then a lot of these questions around or doubts around the human mind that can machines emulate empathy? Can machines do things objectively plus ethically plus with the people skills that are required for the interpersonal part? Probably then we will be able to look at and say whether the machines can solve for that problem or not, right? Rolling up the eyes on a lighter note is much easier to do. We have robots which can do it for us, just that they may do it at a wrong time right now because they would do it just by data, not by actually being emotional intelligence that is required for it. So
and also the time part, you know, for AI to take off is the other question that I asked. If you like, we can hear Sujay first on this one, and then we can come back. I'm very curious to know on that one, Aan, about what's the tipping point for all these. I mean, how does one figure out that this is the point when electricity became commercialized and we became full-blown sort of used to light up cities, villages, and so on? Similarly, when is AI going to be recognized as working for us, and what time is it going to take? Sujay.
Very interesting points, Aan. You know, I think this whole healthcare thing, I think there are these, you know, multiple decisions that people make in their head, right? Multiple levels of decision, I would say. I mean, you're already seeing one level of decision kind of going away with just Google being there, right? I think this whole general physician concept, I think it is being democratized, right? Everybody is a general physician. So that first level, you know, so there are multiple levels in that decision making. And I think, you know, the other day I was trying to book an appointment for my dad on Practo. And, you know, there was a chatbot that I was talking to. Of course, you know, after a certain point, that conversation became pretty rubbish. But, you know, initially it just helped me in doing certain way. And then, you know, Practo didn't have to have staff out there to do that for me. So I think that layer could very well be automated, and a layer of AI could be added to it from a healthcare point of view. I think for some healthcare, or a lot of the largely healthcare today is very, you know, doctor dependent. However, one of the projects that we are doing for a large pharma giant, you know, in fact, one of the leaders in the world we are analyzing skin data for the last 50 years. And luckily, you know, if you go online, you will get that, you know, available. You don't have to pay any money. So you know, there's a lot of research going on. So we are using our own platform, which is Mosaic, to kind of look at that skin data over the last so many decades and figuring out patterns. And this is what AI does, right? Understands pattern, the thing that Aan was talking about, right? Ability to crunch large amount of data. I mean, that's humanly not possible. So it will, you know, it will throw up something. Now, as it's throwing up something and you are telling it right or wrong, it's kind of then learning, right? So what is picking from you is the context. You are picking from it is the pattern. And, you know, once they kind of reach a certain point, I think the right decisions are being made. However, you know, so earlier, maybe there was a team of 50 doctors who would be analyzing this. There's right now at the client side, there are just 2 doctors who are ultimately getting the result and saying, no, yes, yes, no. We've hired 2 doctors on our end also. LTI hiring a doctor was never, you know, thought of, right? So we've hired 2 doctors who are helping us do this. So this is breakthrough research. So I think there are 2 points that I want to make in the healthcare side. One is, you know, there are layers of decision making. Some layers, I think AI automation will kind of target. The other layers, you know, human being human, will need another human on the other side. You know, just like in human resources, however much you do, you should not remove the human out of human resources. I think the human part will not go away in healthcare. And then this whole pattern, I think there's huge amount of pattern work that's happening in the healthcare side, which I think is tremendously benefited from this. I'll address the second question also, and then, you know, I'll flip it over to Aan.
Sure.
I think the time span question, I just feel it's not a tipping point. I mean, it's again, you know, it's seeping in. You know, we just, you know, your car has AI. Depends on what car we're talking about. The kitchen has AI nowadays. The music that we listen to has AI. I mean, these are invisible AI, right? You would not know that AI is working on the background. The content that you watch either on Netflix or has AI. For example, I'll give you something very interesting, which I also didn't know. we were running a project for Viacom, and then we figured that out that this is how you do it. So when you're going online and watching Netflix or some other channel, you see these small movie banners, right? You want to watch movie A, movie B. Now those have these posters. Now these posters very interestingly change if you notice. So it is figuring out if you are liking, let's say, romantic movies. Even in an action movie, they'll give you some very romantic clipping of that movie, so that you're kind of hooked to it. Because if you don't like action movie, and if there's an action movie sitting there, most likely you're not going to never watch it, right? You're never going to watch it. So they are kind of tweaking it at that level. And there is like 90% of the AI that we don't even know that we are living with. So I have a feeling it's seeping in, and it's not going to have like one specific tipping point. That's what I feel. I don't know, Aan, what do you feel?
Yeah.
Sujay, I think you're hitting it bang on. AI, the reason, Yogi, I would not see and try to compare it even with what Edison did at that point of time, was the single fact that AI is far more pervasive in terms of areas it can go in, right? So what you will see is that in certain areas, it has already made inroads that without that you can't survive. Especially if you look at manufacturing automation, right? The kind of things that the machine do without which humans will not be even able to work and operate these machines. Simple things like even L&T has done now, that we can no longer go back to that model where we now control the entire road making machine. We actually get 32 different feeds from it. And we on the fly, on the real time, look at the underlying GIS data as to where the road has to be made, what level has to be done, and accordingly set up the blades of that machine, the angle of the machine, and the path of the machine without the operator touching it, right? And this is as recent as last 4 years. This has been done in the last 4 years, right? And now we have come to a point where
you're on mute, Aan.
Could you hear any part?
Yeah.
Or
No. We just lost 2-3 words.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm giving you an example from our own backyard where we have done this, and now without that, I don't think people can think of a world that they would go back to an operator doing it himself, which would take 4 days, 5 days to do 1 kilometer stretch. With a machine now, you're going more than 40 kilometers, 50 kilometers with just one operator, one machine, right? So there are certain areas where, especially manufacturing automation, processing automation, where AI is already kicked in. There's no way that we would say that it's seeping in even, right? There are certain areas like healthcare, which are very human intensive, which require the emotional intelligence. Those are the areas where the technology is still to prove itself. So depending upon the applications that you're looking at, you will find AI pretty much everywhere there now. Rarely now you see somebody playing, as Sujay was saying, media of any kind. If you do not have an AI backing, probably people are not going to be using that for a long time. The whole reason people are using it is because the AI in the background is able to proactively figure out what next, right? What could be the next thing that would keep you engaged, rather than you trying to figure it out yourself. So for me, there will be areas where we will still wait for technology to evolve a bit more. And the more narrower the application, you will find more widespread the prevalence of that right now, because we are in the age of AI where it is still narrow AI, as we call it. The second part, the second important part that is to realize is in AI, it's no longer an upcoming field. It has been there for 3 years now, at least, that there's a lot of work happening on what we call the explainable AI, or what we call as transparent AI. See, the whole challenge with AI is AI model is a black box model right now. While the fan club has made AI very prevalent with what they were able to show that they can do, but at the same time, the model is not still as open, in the sense that most of the organizations which are giving you AI solutions do not give you the underlying details of it as to what they are doing, right? How they have trained it, what have they trained it with. It's still a black box for a lot of the people. And most of the technology is also giving it to people in such a way that you plug in inputs, you see the outputs, if it works, what you're expecting it to, and find ways and means of measuring it, and then you're good to go with it. that will not work for a large set of applications which require you to understand as to how did you get there, right? Right or wrong, I need to understand. You should be able to explain to me what was the model, how did you get there. That whole field is the explainable AI part. So there's a lot of work happening in that area. Once that part kicks in, and it's not that it's new. For a lot of areas, you can see the explanations already coming in, and especially in the area of human angles involved, where human lives are involved, humans are getting impacted directly, like well-being, healthcare, right? Surgery. Surgery is more seen as automation. It's a process automation, so you'll see a lot more AI there already in play.
Yeah.
But other places where there's any kind of an emotional human touch angle involved, you will find that until unless we solve for the explainable AI, so that the human brain understands and agrees to that fact, that yes, I understand what you're doing, and to me, it's logically, that's what I would have done, then the acceptance will be far better. So that's one area that we're still working upon. Net, AI is a much bigger field, has so much of impact in all walks of life that you're looking at. People are applying it to anything that we can do. People are thinking what we can do with AI. So it will become, it's already pervasive in that sense, but in certain areas, huge inroads already made. In certain areas, probably we are just on the periphery and getting it. And probably for me, it will remain that way till you see the next disruption in technology, which will solve for this part of it. So whether it is the biological chips, or whether it is the quantum computing, or something else that may pop up, which may increase the computational complexity handling manyfold and in very different aspects, probably then some of these things may rapidly advance. Otherwise, to me, I can't foresee too much, but my gut feel says that we are at least a decade away from the point where people will start trusting machines to the extent where they would not want a human in the middle.
My feeling is that ads like the MG ad, where they talk about this, it's a human thing. The lady says it's a human thing because MG is supposed to understand whether you want to open the boot and stuff. And when you select people in your teams for that kind of work, which is supposed to be figuring out how things with which you work in the house, whether it's a vacuum cleaner or a motor car or an air conditioner, how do you figure out whether that person has the competency to think about the AI algorithms that are required to make life easier? What's the special ability that you look for, and how do you figure it out?
Two parts to it. One is depending upon the area that you're solving for. And before I go into the details of those, just to keep aside everything I talk about it later, a real life example that no matter how you evaluate, you never know you've got the right guy or not.
Yeah.
Example is myself. I'm supposed to be an electrical engineer, and I think I get too many black marks at home for that, because I prove it otherwise every time. So there was this case where a cockroach had entered my mixer grinder, right? And like a true engineer, when I saw that, I took out my hit spray and tried to spray it in. It did not fall out. So I obviously took a screwdriver, opened it up. I said, let me open it, I'll get it out. Right? I opened it, I had to open 3-4 layers of it, and then I could never assemble it back. And then obviously my wife calls this guy who is supposed to be good at repairing these things, no formal degree. And he asked me, sir, so why did you not wait for 10 more minutes? Why did you not do one more round of spray just to make sure that it will happen? Because that's all probably you needed to do. And then he spent half an hour to assemble it, whole thing back, piped it clean, got it started, and went away. And this is something that reminded me that no matter what you do, if you do not understand and the problem area and the domain you are working in, no matter how great your knowledge is, you cannot look at it generalized and apply it here and assume that you will get success. So I think the same thing is for us as well, as like any recruitment process. When you evaluate, it's only 50-50 game. It's a very, very, as I say, if you have read the book Fooled by Randomness, then you will know that no matter how much we think we are making the decision logically by data, half the time it is the emotional intelligence or the quotient that's playing in rather than anything else. So that will always be a challenge as to whether you've got the right guy or not. To solve for the AI problem, yes, what we do is we look at what is the area that we're trying to attack? One, the person, how much exposure he has for the AI models itself. For somebody to understand that what kind of a model has to be applied. And then we also try to look at that, does the person have the versatility of understanding the problem area and then thinking of which model will make sense. Is it like the only thing I have a hammer, then everything looks like a nail kind of a person you have, where the guy knows a few of the algorithms, and then no matter what problem you give him, he will just churn them through, all those that he knows, and whichever one is giving him the result, he'll give it to you. Then that probably is a bad choice for you, because what you expect is to have somebody who can look at the domain, look at the context, and then figure out what is the mathematical model for these and which one would probably make more sense to apply. Because once you understand the underlying models on which these neural nets or anything works, and how they optimize for a problem, right? And then you look at the problem domain, you can figure out that this kind of an optimization will help me solve the problem or not, or will this just diverge into too many things and we will end up just being looking at the wrong things, right? So that for us is very important, which basically translates into a person's background has to have some ability to grasp statistics, mathematical modeling, probability, for them to look at these models and try it out, right? So that engineering background is a must, and true engineering background, not that background where the person is good at looking at the tools, playing with them, is familiar with how to run the tool. And unfortunately, in the market right now, you will see a lot of people who have that capability and experience, that they have used a lot of tools, but none of them have the insight into what the tool does. So we tend to look for those people if we are trying to build an AI capability, and in an area where we do not understand well beforehand as to what kind of a solution will work for us. There are certain areas where we know what kind of solutions will work. Like if I'm looking at any solution like a chatbot or a natural language processing areas, now there are certain algorithms which are well established, well proven, prevalent ones. So if people have experience in that, that's always a advantage for us. So we would look for those kind of people. But unfortunately, in L&T NxT, we get into problem areas which are completely new. And that is why the AI team we build is more based on sound mathematical modeling, probability, statistics understanding, and on top of it, the ability to understand domain and associate with the domain to see how this can be solved for.
Sujay, and I'd like to just throw in a small spin on that question which I asked Aan. Also, I feel that guys with liberal arts background can also contribute a lot to this area. But over to you, the mic on that question.
Yeah. No, so, most likely from all the projects that I'm thinking of right now, generally, we never get a project that is called an AI project. Generally in digital, it's never called out a specific thing, and it's generally, a problem statement, unless you have very specific one or two things, like a blockchain project might come as a blockchain project, etc. But there's never an AI project, right? So I'll give you an example. We're working with a very large elevator company. I think this is probably the largest, people moving company, elevator, escalator, all of that. So they wanted to completely revamp the in-elevator experience. Now, typically, a few years back, they would hire one or two companies, and an IT company like ours would be around there to provide an IT solution. I think that day is gone, is behind us, right? Either we sit with the customer and then design that in-elevator experience, and then figure out whether it is AI, whether it is automation, whether it is something else, and then have that conversation. And that's I'm just giving you one example, but most of our projects run that way. So you will see, in order to solve for that, we have a fusion team, if I can call it that, right? Just like I said, you talked about the doctor in the last example. We also have now auto engineers. We have we have people hired from design schools, NID, people who understand behavioral skills. So when you put together a team like that, the IT guys are just one or two, the remaining, and the team size is shrinking considerably. I mean, this team was a 9-people team, ultimately completely revamped the elevator experience for this company. And in fact, we just won the NASSCOM award for that, the best design project for that. It's there in public domain. You guys can see LTI and NASSCOM and design award. The point that I'm trying to make here is that there is no, the composition of the team that we have to put nowadays is very different. We have to have these very young people who can quickly take the design and do some Photoshop, some sort of skills and show you a design. There's a set of team who will understand how these elevator experience work. They'll be able to map that out. Earlier we had people writing functional specs, tech specs, all of that. That's all disappeared. So it's a very different world. So I agree with you that you mentioned about certain skills. I think it is. I would call it more fusion, right? Fusion of lot of skills.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, that's how. And this fusion of skills with a average age of that team not being more than 25, 28.
And Sujay, how do you evaluate these guys? These are all young people who come from college and school, and not business school.
I have a feeling they are evaluating us. I don't think so. We are evaluating them.
Okay.
But we run a couple of tests, right? I mean, we throw them a case study here and there and see what they do. But as Aan said, very difficult to find out till you do the first project with them. So you take your bets. I think you are narrowing down your risks. That's all.
You don't use AI for selecting them. Huh?
Oh, we do. We do, right? So we use a tool called Spire, Spire.ai. To shortlist resumes and all that. But then again, it's all running in that 80-20 mode, right? That tool uses 80% to narrow down. So instead of scanning 100 resumes, what I would do, today, now I get 20-25 resumes. And earlier that tool used to do keyword searches. Now it's getting a little better. It's understanding a little bit more about what I want. And it depends on how many rejections I'm making. If I'm making more rejections, I think it's understanding me better.
Yeah.
So maybe it's a lesson.
Thanks. My last question to both of you, and then I'll hand over to Mani. There's this software program that American prisons used in the past. It's called Compass, to decide about who should get parole and who should not get parole and when. And they found a predominant bias towards whites getting parole easier than the colored Americans. And why I'm stating this is, in that article which I read, which possibly Sujay you only sent me, the social biases baked into decisions can be very dangerous. So both of you, any solutions to that? Any way to make sure that one's own biases don't get baked into it? Because our future is also dependent on our biases, right?
Yeah.
Sujay?
Yeah, I can go. Yeah, so, I think at one level, AI is nothing but a piece of software learning from past data, past decision, right? So, and it's just reflecting that onto you. So, it's the decision that it sees. And if you continue to train the data with similar decision, it's not going to change. So at one point, you can change it by training it with something else.
Yeah.
However, I think the bigger point here is, there was this whole problem of those, the self-driving cars, right? If there's a pregnant woman versus an old person, who would it hit, right? If it had to hit someone. So I think those decisions, although we say AI is making decision on its own, it's at some level it's not true, right? It's basing the decision based on what you are kind of broadly tuning it for. So the starting point might be different, but you can definitely take it to a different level if you start providing it with a useful training data. So I think the biases have to be deliberate, have to be understood, have to have a surface, and then once you know it, I'm sure if it has picked up wrong data, there is still opportunity for you to train it differently.
And also the transparency required for the humans who are writing the algorithm to be open about the biases and also build it in.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, not build in the biases, but build in guards against the biases.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. The Spire tool that I talked about that, Ajay and his team use, Ajay is our CHRO. this team used for, scanning the resumes and, bringing the right ones in. We've started using that for, so internal staffing is also a big deal for an IT company, right? How, if a requirement is coming up, how can we associate people who are on the bench to that requirement so that we don't have to make costly hires? Now, we thought we'll use the same tool internally. Then we figured out that we had massive biases within the company. Of a certain grade only would be able to do a certain kind of project. A certain person who's gone multiple times on site only would be able to do this. And now we figure out that, if a tool is working on these decisions, it will automatically have those biases. So, if we make it flow in a certain direction, these biases will be removed and hopefully it hits better efficiency levels. Right? There's so much amount of inefficiency because of those biases creeping in. You want to add to that?
Sure.
So, before that, Sujay, if I might just take up one point which you mentioned, even if we identify the biases, how do we convince people to get rid of these biases? I know it has an interface with HR and culture, but if you could share some of your thoughts.
Get rid or be aware of those biases and aware of the consequences of the biases.
Yeah, I think it's a very tough question. I don't know why we are not going alphabetically here, Aan, but I don't think so. There is a specific silver bullet on getting rid of the biases. I think being aware is number one. I think having the right team and the right leadership, which understands and wants to fix the bias, is number. You can choose to look the other way, right? I mean, the AI machine is not going to tell you that this is a bias. Be it gender, be it anything else. I mean, there are a lot of times these gender biases also creeping into the engines. I think first is to be aware of it. Second is to start tuning it as you train the data, right? As you train the engine. I think that's where we figured out that if you can tune it in the right way, the biases kind of then start flowing down, on the ground. But it needs an aware team and a team that wants to get rid of the biases. And as I told you, if you set, and I don't know whether I told you, if you set the right measures for a project, and you will start slowly also figuring out that you are not hitting the right goalpost in a project because of the same biases that existed before AI, pre-AI. And now that you've kind of, started using AI, you will start figuring out why am I not hitting those benchmarks? And then if you start trickling down deep, you will see that there are some inherent biases that you want to unlock, and hence kind of potentially increase the potential of the problem that you're solving for.
Yeah, then the best way to get rid of a bias is by asking questions. I mean, if you have a optimism bias, which Kahneman talks about, both Kahneman and Tversky, a voice which nags the team saying, are you being too optimistic about the target, is the right question to ask.
Yeah.
So from biases perspective, Yogi, if I have to highlight key things, I think one of the most important things for biases is to understand that, as Sujay said, a machine will learn from what you make it learn, right? So one of the most important things people are realizing is that there's no silver bullet for this, which is what is troubling people quite a bit. It basically means more work has to be done beforehand when you are looking at the data that you're feeding into the machine, right? You use the compass model of the prison example. I'll give you a much more recent one, which will be an eye-opener. 2017-18, Amazon realized the same problem in its hiring module.
Right.
They found that they had a bias where women were not getting picked up. And when they started digging into the details, they realized that because AI is good at recognizing patterns, even if they blocked the information about the gender of the profile, even then the machine was showing biases towards on this particular angle. Because the machine had already picked up patterns that if looking at the profiles, it saw that the courses numbers were, it understood the courses which the women will be taking more, right? So even that it was able to correlate, and based on that, then the other bias would kick in, that this job requires more of a different profile, right? So one of the things you will see in future of work that people are talking about, especially from an HR perspective, And we did not touch too much upon gig economy, but for me, that is one of the big disruptors for HR, the way we do HR right now. See, all our life, we work in the HR model where we talk about acquisition of the talent, then learning and onboarding of the guy, getting the person comfortable, taking care of the person, well-being, policies, procedures, upskilling, everything, and then trying to retain the person when it becomes a risk as well, or finding a way to release the person as well. The moment you go to a gig kind of a model, you will have such a big problem because you no longer own these employees. Right? And that model is already in play. If you look at US workforce, more than 40% already is gig workforce, right? Gig economy based. So it's not that you're talking about something that's going to hit you later. And that is picking up momentum now, even in the Asia Pac region as well. So given that scenario, one of the things that we normally talk about future of work and HR, how the roles will change. One of the key roles that we keep talking about is saying that HR will very soon start having what we call as bias analysts. Now that's a job profile or a role which never existed so far, but will become very important for HR. You'll have to have people who can basically run statistics on top of the results of a machine to see what kind of patterns, what kind of biases I can make up. That the machine is inherently building and creating connections and maps, and to be able to leverage and find it. Biases are not very easy to find most of the time, especially for an AI kind of an application. So that requires you to actually work through the output data and see, can you create and correlate some patterns that do not make sense to you or which look lopsided, and then you say this is a bias, right?
Yeah.
While biases also have a lot of negative connotation right now because everybody thinks of it as a negative, we have to also keep in mind that biases are also very positive as well. So positive biases you want to maintain, right? When you're looking at a health sciences area and trying to do some analysis, I am much more happy to have false positives rather than ignoring them. Right? For me, a false positive also, at least I'm alerting and then somebody else will look at it. But if I use my own bias and ignore it saying, no, this is a false positive, I may get into much bigger trouble. So biases, it's a whole science that is emerging. It's a job profile that is going to create a lot more new jobs with these technologies. A lot of people will be required to look at and do that. So this is almost like a governance model on top of the machines now. Right now you have governance models on top of the people because people do most of the work. When the machines start doing a lot of this mundane work, a lot of this analysis, correlation and everything else, your job profiles in the HR will start changing where you'll start looking at some of these things. So that would be an important area to look at.
Maybe in my new innings, I can aspire to become a chief bias officer.
So for you, I was thinking of more of what we used to call, what we refer to as from a job profile perspective of VR counselor.
Chief bias investigator, CBI. Yogi, can I add a quick point? If you, just to add on to what Aan's, Aan's made a very interesting point on bias analysis. Actually, I just recollected one of the projects where, some of these tools nowadays, run some reports, right? And these analytics are so sophisticated that most of our clients didn't have such sophisticated analytics before, right? So we kind of, and in between, some of them actually are biases, right? In a way that, like Aan mentioned, right? This gender, that gender. So, largely we are finding two kinds of biases or two ways to deal with this. One is, the software catches biases that have been there. Let's say it's analyzing last 2 decades data. It will definitely find biases that's been there. Let's say, 10 years back, something got set in and it continued. And generally biases are, some decision-making team deliberately wanted to do that, right? And hence they did it. So some kind of stuck as decisions throughout, right? The management team or the decision-making team went away, but it stuck in. Those are the ones that you want to catch and then expose. And hopefully this decision-making team now is more receptive and hence can change it, right? What we are finding interestingly is for long-running decision-making teams, largely in Europe, and nothing against Europe, but I think Europe, the tenures are larger. You will find that if you catch a bias, generally it gets shot down again because these are the bias that was created by the same decision-making team. So, I think some are, all are getting highlighted. Some are getting, again, pushed back into the system. Some are, positively being changed.
That's a deep and fascinating field. I mean, a bias can also become a fashion. For example, if today someone was to wear a trouser which is the old bell bottom, the kind of stuff in Hindi movies which Shashi Kapoor and all these guys wore, would probably, burst out in laughter. But those days it was in. It was a positive bias to have a bell bottom.
And not just that, Yogi. If you look at it, a lot of people would see biases and interpret based on their context as well, right? When you talk about biases, you will see many presentations where people will come and talk to you about this famous toy company which for decades made toys only for boys, and people started calling it that they had a bias, right? If you look at the history and other stuff, you'll find that probably they saw a bigger market there, and that's what drove it. It was the economy that drove it, not that somebody was biased towards not making toys. Because now there's another company that you can look at who makes Barbies, and then you can argue the other way around, right?
Correct.
Because they are tapping into a market segment, they have to prepare for it. You cannot go and market as a bias. And similarly, you look at the scissor companies, right? One of the common examples that is used is if you look at the scissor companies, 99% of them do not make scissors for left-handed people, right? Whereas there's only one which makes it, right? So that's the way it is being put, that they are looking at it and they're catering to this. To me, you cannot give it a flip of a bias. To me, it is like, have you addressed all the segments of your user base, which is a very different problem to attack. So bias also, I think, is a very thin and tight line that we have to walk, because given that in the context of what you are evaluating, it could be a bias, whereas for somebody else, it may not be.
Mani, over to you for questions. More questions from the audience. Huh?
Oh yeah, there have been a flurry of questions, and I must confess that it's been so enriching to listen to both of you gentlemen. I just want to pick up on one point which both of you rightly made, which was already there with us in the questions. Considering that there may be an increasing need for gig workers or the gig economy that we are talking about, could you share some experiences of your own companies? Because you're both from companies which are in the new technology domain as compared to the traditional companies that we come across. Some thoughts, please.
Sure.
Yeah.
So Sujay, we go alphabetically on the first one?
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
Sure.
So
I don't even have a last name that begins with A.
Mine has a double A, so I don't think you can beat it. But just in case you are wondering, I have been beaten big time in my college days. Till my school, I was always roll number 1. When I went to IIT Kanpur, I was surprised to find that my roll number was 002 for my batch. And I actually was very upset because my entire life, I have always been roll number 1. And then I realized that this was a bias of the machine, because the machine decided that the dot comes before the alphabet. So I had a girl named A. Aruna, so she was 001.
Wow.
So
okay.
Yeah.
So coming back to what Prof asked me, Mani asked me, on the gig side, I have been looking at that, and I've been watching that space and using that space very heavily in my current life of L&T NxT, as well as my previous tenure with Cognizant. And what you will find is it's a very, very different ball game, because you no longer own the person. You do not have an employee-employer relationship. So everything changes for you. The way you evaluate, the way you use the person, the whole fact that that person could be working on 3 different projects at the same time. It's almost like a consultant or a contract guy that you have. So the way you evaluate, the way you acquire, the way you measure things, everything will change for you. And that's what I was trying to say, that with the gig economy setting in much more quickly than anything else, HR has to be prepared for it. Otherwise, we'll be caught off guard on it, and we'll suddenly realize that most of our processes are already obsolete when it comes to a gig economy or a gig world, right? There are challenges with the gig world, but those challenges are already been solved for also in a big way. If you approach it conventionally, for example, if I'm trying to take up a person and then trying to get a profile and talk to him or her, and then try to understand what they have done, my ability to do that is much more lower in terms of scale. Whereas if I go and use some of the platforms that are available online, where if these people are registered, they would have gone through their entire work that they have done in a public domain. So if they have a GitHub project, or if they have contributed to an open source project, they actually go through it, evaluate it based on the standards and everything else, and come back and give a score to the person as well as to you. To the person in terms of looking at as to what more he or she needs to do to keep improving the score, and for you to get some relevance of, compared to other people who have worked on this kind of a program, where does the person output stand? And I have started finding out that for me, that is much more important feedback and input compared to no matter how many questions I ask that person, because it's showing me on the ground what kind of an output the person is creating. And this is something that if you look back a little more in detail, you'll find that the organizations are already moving in that model, especially on the IT side where I have had most of the exposure. Everybody is talking about moving away from an input-based model, which is the original model with which everybody worked, to an output-based model, and then evolving it into an outcome-based model, right? So not just moving away from a staff or T&M contract to a fixed bid, but also be able to price your project based on the kind of work you are doing by charging them a niche if the outcome is a niche one, right? So depending upon the work that you are doing, same skill set, but very different problem, very unique problem you're solving, you probably charge a niche for them, right? Very simple terms I'm trying to explain, input, output, outcome model. HR has to do the same thing on the people side as well. We have to start shifting away from what I call as resource intensive model to a results based model. Right? If you have to go to the gig economy side, then you can no longer, because think of a person as an employee who's doing only your work. You have to find ways and means of measuring what you are getting, and based on that, how you are going to reciprocate in terms of your remuneration, in terms of policies or whatever else. Right? So that is where I say you have to move from, to me, whenever I'm talking to my HR teams who work with us, I keep telling them again and again that same way as organizations have moved from an input or are trying to move from an input to an output, and finally dreaming of going to an outcome-based model, we need to also make sure that from HR perspective, we move from what we call as resource and rigor measurement models, where we look at resources, kind of work, how much they can do, to move to more relevance and right time resources, the relevance of the resources and how you can get them in time. So how flexible you are. And then in the end, get to a model which is more primarily driven by results and returns. So you need to get away from individual combined skill sets and more get to the point where, as the art of programming, art of development, problem solving becomes more and more complex, you will require people who will come and go. They will solve a part of it, a puzzle, piece of a puzzle, and go away, right? You can no longer afford to work in a model where one person with you for the lifetime of the project and will do everything for you, right? So from that perspective, it's very important from an HR perspective also to start thinking of policies which will align with the gig economy by moving more towards result orientation or measurements in those lines, without worrying about or overdoing your part on how will I retain the person, how will I plan a roadmap for him or a career path for her, and all those things. Sujay?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So no, being from an IT company, we always had a lot of contractors, right? I mean, we had, where we couldn't find staff, we had contractors, and then we had these agencies who would come and say, oh, this guy is a very niche skill on SAP HANA, for example, to bring him or bring her in and, start off. So I was just wondering, I mean, we have been using gig workers almost forever, right? So what's the difference between now and then? So if you look at why people are associating gig workers, is mostly there is a platform involved. Upwork, I think Upwork is the largest, gig platform out there where I can go and register myself as a great designer, and then, they'll find me some work and they'll take 20%, 10%, 5% based on. So it's like the Uber model for, people with skill sets, general skill sets. And suddenly you see Upwork. If you guys go and Google Upwork, you will see that they purged about 1.8 million people or so. I don't remember the exact number suddenly. And apparently the new CEO came in and said that, look, we are going to focus only on Fortune 500 companies. We will only staff these many clusters. We will not do. So suddenly that part of the business is also moving to like a contractor business, right? Where we have, let's say, 10 partners whom we contract with. They give us the same thing. We send them requests and they give us people. There's no platform involved in between. So Upwork is also kind of moving towards that. But very interesting development that's happened as of now is, I think, at least in our field, everybody is becoming an Upwork. To me, a lot of our work right now is happening in a gig manner. LTI just built a platform called Canvas, and you guys can Google that up. This is our XFH platform, anything from home. Because, we've been delivering for last 6-8 months from home. Everybody is at home, and this will continue. Of course, our business kind of lend ourselves to doing it more that way. But now almost every company has a platform of their own. And that way, the gig economy just got federated. And we can now kind of get some people, like Aan was saying, into doing some part of the project and skip out, right? And then we now own the platform, so we don't have to pay any commission. We don't have to do anything. Maybe there'll be a platform of platforms later. But I have a feeling just because now, because of the pandemic, we kind of got used to a certain way of working. I think this will accelerate this whole gig thing much more. But the question of processes, etc., that Aan mentioned, I think that's a big question for us to solve. I don't know when we, use contractors. Actually, depending upon the lifespan of the contractors, we do many things that we would do for employees, right? Right from celebrating birthdays. And I mean, if the team is of a certain order, it will do it. But there are contractors that come in and go for a month. People hardly notice, right? That's just at a rate card level. But it's really, I mean, how much of it should be, how much of it is employee specific? Can they be considered employee? I think till date, even Uber hasn't been able to fix that in many countries, right? Whether the cab drivers are employees or not, do they get benefits or not? And we are just getting started. So, but the point that I really find interesting is that because of this pandemic and because of the way we are working now, I think this has given a huge lift to the confidence that we can work with a workforce that can come in and go. Anyway, I think the millennials were that way, right? The millennials kind of, the design team that I spoke about that we had built, the people used to just look at projects, and if you put them on bench for 2 months, they would just go because they want to move from project to project. It doesn't matter whether it's in the same company or not. So I think there are multiple factors that's kind of accelerating this, and we better be ready.
Sure, I appreciate that. We have Mr. RSR Murthy, who's now a consultant, used to be the CFO with Madison. He has an interesting question, and I'd request him to share his question, please. RSR, over to you.
Hello.
Go ahead.
Hello.
Just unmute and speak, RSR.
Yeah, hello. I mean, this is a bit of a philosophical question to the engineers. Sort of a thought on my part. I'm just wondering, in a post-AI world, what will remain of human experience? And will it leave anything for in-person experience? And your take on this, please.
Yeah, that's a definitely alphabetical order question.
Okay. So, RSR, if I could call you that.
Yes, absolutely.
Again, two things. I think many a times this question is asked with the idea that AI would go and change everything for us, take away all the work that we do. And this is where I always say that look back at any disruption from early ages on. Every time that fear was there, that it is going to disrupt the society and the society no longer will exist as we know it. And every time you find that it has become a far better, far more interconnected society, no matter what we are looking at. Right? You will see this disruption happening at two levels right now, not just for the AI, but also for some of these companies that we have, whom we otherwise, based on the kind of work they do, we see them in awe. But we are also shocked at the fact that they are making so many things digital that the people are no longer have their own non-digital life, right? So we keep cribbing in sessions that you will hear in every place that there's so much Facebook, there's so much Twitter and Insta and everything else that people are all there on their phones all the time and everything else. That is one part of it. The second part of it is now AI is gaining ground on the same lines where as more and more AI is becoming visible, more and more people are starting to talk about the fact that will anything be left for humans to do? And this is where I say always look at the past and then also look at it as to whether in future the same thing can happen or not. And for me, some of the big events, right, when the world moved from vocal mode of knowledge sharing and passing knowledge to a writing mode. People like Socrates, right, some of the famous, the world knows it as one of the best philosophers that could ever be. They were opposed to it, right? They said that it will be fury of God will be thrown on you, and all that stuff came all that time. Right? When printing happened, you can see what happened. Most of the Arabic world was against it when the printing came into play. But in the end, the knowledge became a lot more easily available to people as it became with writing, right? Writing made it much more reachable to people who did not have access to people who they could go and listen to. Printing made it much more prevalent. And then came digital media, right, which made it so much so that everybody is now an expert in everything, right? So that's the other side of the extreme that we are getting into now. Same thing is going to happen on the AI side as well. To us, as I said, AI will take away a lot of the more complex by data, by analysis. It will amplify things that we train it to do in terms of flexibility, scaling, different kind of amplifications it will do. But what it will not be able to address, and in a positive sense, if you have to put it, is what it will leave for humans to continue to do more is give them more time to be more cognitive, right? So the way we look at it is a lot of the things, the jobs, the roles that we will change for the future will be much more for humans to be able to apply their creative thinking, emotional intelligence, their ethical compasses on various things to come up with so much more that can be then done by the machines as a collaborative intelligence, collaborative togetherness kind of a thing.
Aan and Sujay, I had a quick question here. If you look at collaborative working and multi-generations being involved, for example, you talked about a toy company,
Yeah.
Could be Hasbro, could be Lego, whatever. I mean, in the new disposition where people can work from home and, work with imagination, possibly you could get some fantastic ideas from a 9-year-old on how a toy will do.
Yeah.
And therefore, do you think AI will also see some kind of a reform or the need for reform in some of our labor laws, etc., concerning age and things? And a person may be above 65 and a person may be below 15, but can contribute.
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely. And that's already happening, Yogi. If you look at it, you're already seeing now people are actively, at least the marketing guys you can see are already talking about catching young people to code because it helps them build their logic and connect their wiring of the head for solving problems and logic and all that stuff, and they can do it much better. So, and there are whiz kids all the time that you're seeing examples. There's a 13-year-old kid who's part of IBM who already does AI programming. So all those cases are going to further put fuel to this fire of being able to go to all the extremes. We also have on the other extremes people who are at 70 or 80 years we are seeing who have picked up these technologies, use their past model and experience, and come up with things and working upon it as well, playing with it, right?
Yeah.
So this will obviously Uberize. I would stop using the word democratize. I think the right word now is more Uberize the technology field also across. Yeah. But specifically coming back to the RSR's question, my thinking and my individual view of this is that it's not that you will have only AI doing it and you'll get to a world where people are only hunting around and that's the only thing left to fight for food. That's unfortunately the image that you get when you look at Terminator or Matrix kind of a world. We are going to have a lot more interesting things that you will find you will have more time for you to do and solve for with these machine tools helping you do it, which otherwise probably you require to be in a specific ecosystem to go and solve for, right? So many of these things, for example, just to give you an idea, this whole drug discovery thing is a big area that we have worked upon. And drug discovery with all the human work and everything, workforce, effort, timelines, all the computing power put together is at least a 10-year average process, right? By putting in artificial intelligence, people are trying to cut it down to a year worth of time. Right? So, and with that fact, because the data is now becoming visible, what they're finding is surprisingly when they put out a challenge of drug discovery or a part of a drug discovery problem on something like a Kaggle platform, which is an open platform where across the world people can come and solve for it, right? You will be surprised that 9 out of the 10 times, the guy who takes the first award is not an expert from the industry that the problem belongs to. It's always somebody coming from outside with a lateral thinking who has solved similar problems somewhere else, but never realized that he could solve for it here as well, right? And that's how that whole world is moving. In fact, AI is one area where you'll find that even though we have the FANG guys being able to show their teeth or their swords in all other areas except for AI, right? AI is one area where you'll find startups are still the big play guys, because they can look at a particular problem, go and hit it with all their might and solve it, compared to a big company who's trying to look at 10,000 different problems. And it's also about what data you have. So AI is all about data. So that is why when people said data is oil during the analytics days, I used to look at it with a raised eyebrow, but now I've realized that probably they were very right, because if you think of AI as the engine, then yes, data is the oil. So focusing on data, creating data, playing with data, all that is going to become a lot more Uberized. People are coming with models where people are working on these things without realizing they're working on it, right? Google's reCAPTCHA, so many of us use. And we don't even realize that Google is actually using our effort to label their data free of cost. In fact, they charge us for it because people who are building the reCAPTCHA services are being charged for it. And there are other companies now who are coming up with model and saying that, hey, this reCAPTCHA thing is a complete pack of crap that we are going after, because we are basically giving effort, work, and also paying to Google. So here is a company which you can basically take at a much cheaper cost, and they will actually give that data back to you or learning back to you as well. So there's so many things that are happening there, which are opening all these views, alternates. But remember that for each one of them, there will always be some pros, some cons, right? So same thing happening for people. It's not that everything is going to go away. Everything will be done by machine. Think of it as that the more mundane things the machine will be able to do for, and free us up to become more creative, more abstractive, more thinking about those areas of problems that we want to go after, right? Whether it is in the area of empathy, emotions, behavior, look at those and work upon.
And Yogi, to your point about, kids, I think we've done some very interesting projects where, you guys would have heard about design thinking, right?
Yeah.
So this is picked up, and nowadays design thinking has to be done, in the starting part of every project. And we do these things called empathy interviews. And these empathy interviews are interviews with 5-year-old kids, 10-year-old kids, 70-year-old people, depending on what you're building, right? So, we're doing some projects for diapers. You got to go sit with the mom and the kid. We were doing something for another adhesive company. We had to go in the factory. So I think we are bringing them in, maybe not directly as a direct labor, but these
opinion makers,
bringing that in. And to RSR question, I think post AI philosophical question. I think this lockdown has made everybody philosophical, by the way. So I think you have every right to ask a philosophical question. Before the mobile phone was there, I used to remember a lot of phone numbers. Today, I remember just 2 or 3 because I know the phone is already there. So my worry sometimes when I reflect and think about my son, and it's a generational thing, right? So the next generation probably will face the consequence. But I just hope the rise of AI doesn't take away the NI, right? The natural intelligence. Because my ability to memorize numbers is completely gone. Memorize anything is gone because everything has something, right? Before going to sleep, I talk to Alexa and tell her, remind me for this tomorrow. These things wasn't there, and hence my capacity in my head is going down. I'm sure it's going down because the other day there was an OTP that came. Usually 6-digit OTP is easy to remember. That day some 9-digit, 10-digit OTP came. I had to constantly toggle between the SMS and the app. So, my memory is kind of going down, or I am, getting dementia, one of those.
No. In one of my tenures in a company, I had a difficult boss I'm playfully saying difficult boss. He's a nice person. But he used to say, you're getting intellectually lazy.
Yeah, that's one way of saying it. Yeah.
Okay. There's another question from Dr. Lakshmi Mohan. She's the director of IT and Business School, Kharghar. Over to you, Lakshmi.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for an absorbing and insightful session. My question is about how AI and ML would impact placement processes or campus interviews. This also comes out of an instance that happened in the last placement season, where I had one of the banks that came for picking up the candidates, and where usually there would be about 5 of them coming for an interview and selecting about 10 students, we had only one from the HR who came for an interview, came for the interview process, and we had only one selection. The process was, that they had a machine on which actually tried gauging the expression of the students, trying to connect it to the personality that the student possesses, and it was quite shocking. I don't know whether we are heading towards this kind of an campus uh, placement process. So I wanted your thoughts on this.
Yeah. Early on in my life, I got subjected to Thomas profiling and I got terribly scared of what it showed me. So, I think we experimented a little bit with that, but we did it as a parallel process, this time when we went to business schools, and we got some very interesting results. Um, I think it kind of is very diagonally opposite, right? When a person would go, would you select this person versus what is the machine's interpretation? It's completely diagonally opposite most of the times. Of course, there are matches, but it's most of the times. And I think it's because I think we are observing far more parameters, which I think is not getting observed. And those early biases, if I can call that, sets in. And those are personal biases, right, of the person who's going to the campus. So, if that person likes people who communicate well, right, very low on content, that will reflect in the hiring that the person did there, right? And I know if I am sending 10 people out for recruitment, I know that this person will bring me great communication people who have great look and feel, but that person doesn't give that much weightage to content, versus a machine kind of balances out completely. So it's shock and awe to see something like this, but I don't know what Aan's experience has been. I have been completely bewildered right from the day the Thomas profiling happened, by the way.
But this is quite scary. I mean, I don't know where we are heading towards, but trying to analyze the personality out of a smile or out of certain expressions and then picking up candidates. I don't know whether, I think the right word here is bias. Yes.
Yeah, someone told me, ma'am, that if they ask you a question and if you roll your eyes up towards the left hand side, you are lying. If you roll up your eyes on the right hand side, you are saying the truth, because you're picking the data from left side of your brain, which is more creative, versus something like that. Now imagine, right, if that really happens to be the case, I can even hack the system, right? If I know all of these, I can continuously keep rolling my eyes towards the left and pass any interview. So I don't know. I mean, I know Aan has the right answer to it, so I'm just waiting to hear him.
So, ma'am, I think look at it from two perspectives. One, make sure that the data points that you are looking at are complete, because many a times there are a lot of other factors that are coming into play, especially if this has happened last year or this year. We know that most of the banks have been down in the dumps. So it could be also an excuse for the fact that the numbers were not there. They already had made up their mind that they're going to pick up only one or two to maintain the relationship. So in that case, then everything else is just a facade to get what they want to, right? To me, I would be very surprised that if somebody looks at a machine and starts trusting the expression analysis. We have been doing that, but it's always as an assistance to people. So we have done a lot of for the banks themselves, the whole relationship manager guys who are doing things a lot more remotely now, right? So for them to feel a little more high touch, be able to get help in terms of when they're talking to a person, whether the person is connecting with them, is getting completely out of phase, out of sync, the machine can highlight based on the facial expression, try to read and tell him what the emotion looks like or what the data looks like based on what they're seeing on the facial expressions. But those are supposed to work as more for him as hints to go and change his tact, right? They do not become the driving force for the direction of that. So the general sense I would get is probably I think you should wait and see if you see the repetition of this 1 or 2 more times, then you can assume that probably these guys are looking at that process. To me, it more sounds like probably it was one-off or low year kind of a thing. And because the commitments had to be kept low, that was used as an angle of excuse rather than anything else. That is one.
But a couple of observations on this. If one was to go by a digital sociogram, I just want to be empathic to the machine for a minute. You can't argue with the machine.
Yes.
You can't have a two-way conversation with the machine. So the machine is at a bit of a disadvantage there. The second point is, if we can have, I'm not talking about this IBM story, but I think much more observant than adults or children. If you see a 5-year-old who's not allowed to speak because children are not supposed to be making noise even today, they sit in a corner of a drawing room and they're lapping up and absorbing every little detail that's going on. And that capability, if it can be fed into a machine, which is unbiased but has that childlike curiosity and observation, you might just end up making the right decision.
Yes. And Yogi, just to add to it, there are a lot of tools which are using AI in terms of helping the panel that we set up for these interviews for the campuses to guide them to where the next set of questions needs to go. So they are actually looking at the contents of the answer that they're getting from and accordingly trying to judge that do you need to evaluate this person in this area a little bit more, it's still not clear kind of a thing. And then they will give them the next set of questions that they could dig in to see and make connections. And many times what happens is if the person has a very shallow knowledge in a particular area or is giving you spoon-fed things, then you know that when you start asking questions in related areas, which the person may not have covered, it will start emerging as to where it really lies, right? So you can start seeing the disconnections in that point and you realize that it's a very limited know-how, probably prepared for the interview kind of a thing, rather than something that has been acquired, understood, and assimilated and put to use, right? So we see a lot of those kind of tools, and those I think will be more and more applied because they bring in a lot more objectivity. And those, I think you will see more and more prevalent use of those. You will also see that people will ask even the campus guys to go and work on certain problems even before coming in. Because the other thing that people are realizing is interview does not give you enough data points to make a call. So the natural behavior that has to emerge out of it, you can only basically do when you observe for a longer period, right? And in different situations. So that is where you are seeing things like HackerRank, Codility, and all these things, platforms are coming up for especially in the IT area where developers are being asked to go and solve problems there on that platform. So as they are going through it, the way they write the code, the way they rework through the code, you can make out, the platform can make out as to, is it being spoon-fed? Is the guy thinking through what is the thought process, how the problem is being attacked, logically how the process is evolving, rather than as to how good the code is, right? Because at the end of the day, we all understand that when we pick up young guys, they have to be trained to become better coders, right? They are not the best of the business coders that we want. They understand programming. What you look for is, do they have logical reasoning in them? Do they have the ability to think out of the box? Are they able to attack a problem from different areas based on past knowledge? So which cannot come out unless you see them doing the program, right? So that's what we will see, that a lot of these tools, to enable AI for these evaluations, you need to have more data. And inherently what you will see is more and more interactions will happen to capture that data. So to me, these things you will see more and more in campus as well. But I would be surprised if they become the whole and soul of the decision making. I think they will remain just data collection and analysis tools. And that is why I'm almost in my head thinking that probably it was more the numbers were not there. And that's how that approach that you saw.
Yeah. And sometimes, Aan, it kind of helps take the halo effect out, right? Because I have been in an interview situation where I have interviewed a person and I've kind of got mesmerized and said, great. But it goes to the next level where they have to, go through some case study, right? And write the case study. And that's where you figure out, oh my God, you couldn't see these things like the aptitude or the attitude. I'm sure it's the next level where if you put an AI machine and you'll see, oh my God, you didn't even see all of these, right?
Yeah.
So you kind of then, as a candidate, then you would want to hack through all these three, right? Because I think largely 7 out of 10 candidates want to hack the interview process.
Yep.
But I think if you start putting these layers, it'll be difficult to kind of, or it'll kind of start taking the halo out.
Yeah, so the learning from what both of you are saying, it takes away the halo effect, it takes away the horn effect, which is the opposite of halo effect. It takes away the recency effect. It takes away any other. So I think it's a good supplement to use along with human judgment, but not a substitute.
Absolutely, absolutely.
It takes away the interviewer, actually, Yogi. It takes away the interviewer because, usually it is when I have had 10 managers bring in 10 different kinds of people, always, every year. I think that will become compressed, right? If you have machine aiding, then probably we'll have 3-4 type of people coming in.
Right.
All right, over to Indrapal Singh ji. He's been on the leadership team of Godrej and Boyce till he retired. Over to you, sir.
I just a couple of comments. Great insight into the shape of things to come. I happen to sit on one selection committee for solving particular problem which our internal Infotech team was not able to solve, and we land up interviewing so-called gig workers. And one of them really made a very strong case based on his own score on the Upworks platform, how he had evolved over a period of time. And we found that the capability of these people who had worked on Upworks, they were very result oriented. So we took the decision in their favor rather than employing people on a long-term basis. And we found that they produced outstanding results, but we had great difficulty in retaining them. They finished those projects and then they left. So I would urge that every organization that can afford should experiment in terms of dealing with these gig workers and maybe solve chronic problems in a very efficient and quick manner. And the other thing, Yogi made the point right at the beginning, a case for liberal education, liberal arts education. I think they would be far better problem solvers considering the fact that the problems are getting far more complex. Yeah. So like Sujay mentioned that whatever difficult problems, successfully solved by various teams, they found that the teams which had more liberal arts education people, they were very effective. So that is I think a very good way to go forward, and particularly for management education, which lately has become far more quantitative in nature rather than towards, the breadth of human experience, so to speak. So I think maybe the technology will force us to look at human experience more closely than the human beings themselves. We are trying to shift to technology, but technology is telling us that don't underestimate the human beings, and they are pretty smart, learn to use them better.
I guess it's the collaboration between human beings and technology, which is the very, very clear signal that we are getting today. Just one last question, which is more in terms of the way ahead. Would both of you suggest what are some critical success factors that people need to follow to succeed in these changing times?
Sujay, you want to take that, or should I still follow the alphabetical order?
Yeah, I think let's keep following.
Okay, no worries. Okay. So very quickly, from my own experience, I think when we look at any new technology, not just AI, if you look at even quantum, we have been playing around with quantum technology before that with blockchain. So we get to see the technologies when they're in their hype cycle and everybody is gung-ho about them, and we look at as to what we need to do. I think there are 3-4 things you have to always look at. One is what we always call about while you're using technology, do your stuff much more smartly, much more effectively, and that technology, no matter in which form it comes, it will amplify a certain part of the solution for you, right? That's how the technologies get adopted. They will not just solve it, they will amplify the process, the value that you're getting out of it, and then they become widespread because of that. The amplification could be the flexibility that you're solving for, like you would see in auto manufacturing or software development. It could be speed amplification, like you have seen AI getting used, a lot of rules-based engines being used in fraud detection, because it's such a huge field, such huge data, that manually it's almost impossible to scan everything. So you go random sample and do it. And once you put a machine to it, you can scan much more bigger data set with the chances of finding the detections much more easily, or much higher levels of identification of frauds, right? Or if it is cancer treatment, if you have to look at healthcare, even public safety is something where speed amplification can be seen using technology. A lot of examples are out. And amplification is not just flexibility, speed, or scale. You could also be looking at decision-making amplification, right? And a good example of that is your equipment maintenance that you do. The entire AI use in equipment maintenance, predictive maintenance, all that is the decision-making amplification. Financial services, you see it day in, day out, right? And then you have seen already, Sujay talked about personalization amplification that you are seeing everywhere, Netflix, retail stores, e-commerce websites, Amazons of the world, they're doing all that. So whenever you look at technology and you look at how to leverage it, one thing you have to identify is what will it amplify for me, and let it then focus on that and amplify. The other part is where we say you have to rehumanize. So one of the focus areas for us whenever we are working with AI or anything else is which are the areas we require more humanizing and which are the areas which require more machine amplification, identify and then work. Otherwise what happens is you will always be in a conflict situation. Second part is what we call as normalizing your work in a more responsible manner, right? So when you normalize, you look at what is the purpose, what is the part that the machine will play, how the human and machines will interact together, and then do it, right? The third part is, which is where it's a huge human angle, is the judgment integration. If you think of a machine to solve, where will you integrate judgment that is coming from human, that is coming from machine? You will always get into trouble, right? And the fourth part, which Yogi already touched upon, which I refer to as more as smart interrogation, right? So you have to also think of as to how will you interrogate whatever the machine or the human is doing, right? The whole checklisting process in very simple terms, right? But even for the machine work, you have to think of how will you checklist it? What will you do to detect that the machine is doing the right thing? It is going and gunning for the objectives that I have planned it for, right? So if I have coded it for using AI or decision expert system or simple conventional code, I always know what my objective or what problem it's supposed to solve. And I have to keep evaluating, is it solving that problem for me or not, right? And this is not something new. You will know that all the statistical models have this model update cycles, right? You evaluate the model that whatever parameters you use to build the model, if any of them have changed, does my model need to change, right? And people have seen a lot of these problems that they have used a model which was based on certain demographics or certain biases of a particular time. And then 4 years, 5 years down the line, the population has changed, the distribution has changed, and suddenly you see that your model is no longer working, you are losing out on sales, revenue, everything. So this is not something new, it's just conventional wisdom that you have to apply to solve for this unconventional areas. Sujay, over to you. That is my thought process.
Yeah, no, interesting. And so I think Aan kind of reflected on the things that, the success factors on the AI side. For me, I'll just probably give you some insights on, what my broad thinking was past few years when we had a team working on digital projects and AI was part of it. And, how do you kind of change few measurements, right? Because clearly the earlier kind of measurements didn't work. So the three things that came tops for me, and then I'll add one on Aan's, Aan's answer. One was, how ability to work in a diverse team or manage a diverse team, depending upon what your role is. I think it is far more difficult than what it sounds like on paper, because it's not birds of a similar feather. They're different birds. How do you fly together? How do you talk together? How do you bond together? Yeah. It's very difficult. So, that I think is something that I saw was bothering me, and I put that under key measures. The next thing that I was always looking forward to was ecosystem management. I think that's a skill that's kind of, come in over the past few years, because a lot of these you have to, work with a startup, work with a software provider, which is not an SAP or a Microsoft. How do you manage that ecosystem, or how do you work with that ecosystem? How do you become one of them? There's lots to learn there, and there's a way to manage them. Sometimes they don't come to office because their dogs are not well. There is a very different way of working with them, and you've got to have that skill in you. And the third one, which I think is the number one, is your ability to work in short cycles. I think this is something that's come our way like a storm, right? Ability to work in short cycles. We're kind of used to working in these large projects, and it's kind of agile or whatever you call it. And one of my customers said, agile is our way of telling you that we can't make up our minds. But whatever it is and however you defined it, you got to work in these short cycles. So those are the three changes in measurement. And the fourth one on side of Aan that he spoke about is, earlier we used to have this book called Build to Last, right? Now I think, how are you building to change? I think that's another key measure because everything is changing. So how do you build to change? So those were my 4 points. I know we're kind of getting close to the end time as well.
Yes, I think we've always tried to maintain that culture of starting on time and finishing on time. Though for once, we strongly felt that the session was so absorbing and so captivating that people were almost spellbound right through the session. Thank you so much, Mr. Aan Chauhan and Sujay Sen. And thank you, Yogi, for really thinking that these were the two best people to bring in to share their experiences on such a difficult topic of how technology and human resources can be married to make organizations more productive.
Thanks, Aan, and thanks, Sujay. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, as usual, we will take everybody's 2 minutes to have our group photograph. Can I request all of us to put on our videos? This will stay as a good memory of the times that we spent together. So everybody gets their 1 minute to put on their cameras. While I tell you that next Wednesday, we have a very interesting session in the Wednesday webinar on how CSR approaches have changed in this COVID scenario and what is the way ahead. And next Friday is our MDP on how to build your own personal brand. And I think if I understood a lot from what the speaker said today, it's ultimately I, the individual, who's going to make a difference to the organization if I'm able to blend artificial intelligence, emotional intelligence, and social intelligence. I think that's been one of the best things that we got to learn today. I'm almost seeing everybody ready out there. Can I specifically request Aanchal, if your camera can be on, otherwise we're going to see the alphabet in the picture. All right, we have our efficient team from the Secretariat. Lakshmi, would you do the honors of capturing this moment for all of us?
Yeah, sure, sir.
And I see a young student also there who's going to be part of our picture. Please have some digital patience. We have 3 screens to cover. So just, we don't know when the camera will come to you. So keep smiling.
Done.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks
for
a
being
lot.
here. And thank you so much for a
Thanks
wonderful
again,
session.
Aan. Thanks, Sujay. Thanks, Professor Mani, and all the audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Have
you.
a great weekend.
Have a
God
nice
bless.
weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.